Greetings. This is Patrick Jerome, and I'm coming to you from the Artist Loft in my hometown of Elgin, Illinois. This is lecture 2 in a series I'm doing on statistical astrology. In week 1, I discussed birth times. Today I will be discussing the work of Michel Gauquelin and his wife, Francoise. After that, week by week, I will show you how to read charts using the latest statistical information. But those of you with math anxiety needn't worry. I won't be technical. I've taken the data and used it to create a system of interpretation that I call skyTotems. It's fun, easy to learn, much easier than traditional astrology, but most important at all, it's based on fact and not mere conjecture. People think that astrology is a matter of belief, and for most people it is. They either believe in astrology or they scoff at it. But neither side has any real data. But such data exist. And in the coming weeks, I'm going to present that data and show you how to use it. Are you ready? Let's go. When Michel Gauquelin was a little boy, he was fascinated by astrology. He'd cast the horoscope of his friends and dash around the playground making so many predictions that his classmates called him Nostradamus. But when he went to college, he became embarrassed by his interest in astrology and devised elaborate practical jokes to make believers look like idiots. Once, for example, he put an ad in the paper, "Get a free horoscope," and all the respondent needed to do was give him feedback on how accurate the reading was. Then he sent every single person the exact same reading, based on the horoscope of a mass murderer. And a majority of respondents rated their reading either accurate or very accurate. Gauquelin took great joy in making fun of them. But he was not a man to accept easy answers, and years later, after receiving his PhD, he had a satori moment. He realized that neither believing in astrology nor making fun of it was even remotely scientific. Both belief and skepticism involved little more than copying an attitude. To actually decide the matter, to decide any matter, you need data. And that's when Gauquelin became statistical. With the help of his wife Francoise, who, like Gauquelin, had degrees in both psychology and statistics, Gauquelin began by gathering the birth information of outstanding athletes and doing controlled studies. And he found, to the joy of his inner skeptic, that none of the traditional aspects did anything. Not signs, not houses, not trines, not squares, not rulerships, not anything. But his goal was not to debunk astrology. His goal was to discover the truth. And when he looked at the data from a different angle, he discovered a pattern that blew his mind. He wasn't ready to announce results. This was just one study, and it was just one aspect, and the study needed to be repeated. Not just with athletes, but with other professions. But the results were so striking that he was willing to embark upon years of difficult and tedious work. The Gauquelins didn't just gather the charts of more athletes, they gathered the charts of doctors, scientists, actors, politicians, journalists, artists, musicians, writers, businessmen, and military leaders. They gathered the charts of French freedom fighters. They gathered the charts of murderers, alcoholics, mental patients. They gathered the charts of everything they could get their hands on. And they tested those groups statistically. In every single case, the pattern was the same. The key planet wasn't always Mars, but the key sectors were identical. A statistically significant number of professors clustered just after the rise and just after culmination. Astrologically speaking, the clusters were in the 12th and 9th houses, using either Placidus or tropocentric houses. And here are the results. With the moon placed in the 9th or 12th houses, writers and murderers were high. With Mars, it was athletes, military leaders, businessmen, and doctors, with artists being low. With Jupiter, it was actors, politicians, journalists, businessmen, and military leaders, with doctors and scientists being low. With Saturn, it was doctors, scientists, and freedom fighters being high, and artists, mental patients, journalists, and writers being low. Notice there's a cross movement with Saturn and Jupiter. We'll get to that later. At any rate, this is all very nice. It's more than nice, really. It's earth-shaking. But what does it all mean? And that, my friends, is what these lectures is all about. What does it all mean? What is the psychology behind the data? When the first study was published in 1957, it was reviewed by scientists who could find nothing wrong in Gauquelin's methods or conclusions. Indeed, at a conference, one scientist who was heard to remark, referring to Gauquelin, quote, "He has certainly proved his point, but I wish it were Venus." This remark reveals two things. First, the scientists as a group found nothing wrong with Gauquelin's methods, and they begrudgingly accepted the results. But make no mistake, the acceptance was begrudging, which leads us to point number two. The scientists did not want astrology to be true. It was too great an assault on their worldview. Most scientists are agnostic. Many are atheists, and if they are believers, they're Christians in a very traditional and compartmentalized way. Their true religion is science. And if astrology is true, they are headed for an identity crisis, because proving astrology is tantamount to proving the existence of God. And not a Christian God, but something far more intellectually challenging, but also more frightening for those who are unwilling to go there. So why did the scientists say, "I wish it were Venus"? Because Mars is the god of war, and Gauquelin proved that Mars people are warriors. Had it been Venus, it would have been interesting, but the implications would have been less disturbing. And it wasn't just Mars that carried ancient echoes. It was Jupiter. It was Saturn. It was the moon. Gauquelin's results had an eerie resonance with ancient symbolism. Not the symbolism of the traditional houses, which have been categorically refuted, but of the planets. Indeed, the data are making two statements. One, that astrology is statistically valid, and two, that those statistics are in accord with symbols that have been in use since before the birth of Christ. Militant Mars was prominent in the charts of military leaders. Jovial Jupiter was prominent in the charts of actors and politicians. Sober Saturn was prominent in the charts of doctors and scientists. And the melancholy moon was prominent in the charts of poets and murderers. And the profound congruence of these findings with ancient symbols is a major reason why the skeptics had declared Gauquelin their enemy. And make no mistake, he was their enemy. In the 1970s, Skeptic magazine became so obsessed with proving Gauquelin wrong that they offered him a challenge. They believed that his expected totals were off, and they proposed doing a follow-up study to check it out. What's more, they promised that, right or wrong, they would publish their findings. Well, they did this study, and they crunched the numbers, and the numbers came out exactly as the Gauquelins had predicted. But surprise, surprise, Skeptic magazine refused to publish the findings. And they didn't just bury that study. In an even more ambitious challenge, the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, which included a group of prominent scientists and one magician, the amazing Randy, created a minor scandal when they cheated in an attempt to prove the Mars effect wrong. When the numbers were in, it was clear that Gauquelin had won. The committee suddenly found a batch of non-Mars charts that they had held in reserve, and these charts made it look like Gauquelin had lost. There's a fascinating article about the whole sordid affair written by one of the scientists on the committee. He was no friend of astrology. Indeed, like the others, he was hungry to prove it wrong. But the cheating disgusted him. You can read his expose online. His name is Dennis Rawlings, and the article is called Star Baby. So if you look up the committee in Wikipedia and read about how they debunked Gauquelin's work, understand it's bullshit. No, it's worse than bullshit. It's propaganda. And Star Baby, Rawlings wrote about an encounter he had with Amazing Randy. And I quote, I had asked Randy the big question, the question all committee members will be asking themselves for years to come. Why? Why get involved in a conspiracy that was as stupid as it was low? Why do something that would mark him and the committee for the rest of their lives? The reply was ever the same. We can't let the mystics rejoice. End of quote. We can't let the mystics rejoice. Indeed. Amazing Randy, by the way, had a Gauquelin Mars. In his own way, he's a warrior. He defined his encounter with Gauquelin as a war, and he had to win, even if he had to cheat to do it. But it wasn't just the skeptics who were offended. Many prominent astrologers, most notably Dane Rudhyar, also attacked Gauquelin because although he had approved a new kind of astrology, a neo-astrology, all tests of traditional astrology were negative. And Rudhyar, who had spent most of his adult life expounding on the deeper meaning of signs, houses, elements, and his own statistically meaningless creation, the lunation cycle, was too set in his ways to change. Traditional astrology, in short, was just as stubbornly wrong-headed as the skeptics. But it was worse in a way because at least the skeptics grasped the implications of Gauquelin's findings. Proving astrology is tantamount to proving the existence of God. The skeptics did not want God to exist, which is why they attacked Gauquelin so ferociously. But what Rudhyar failed to grasp was that astrology had won. It wasn't his brand of astrology, but it had won, which meant that astrologers were under a moral obligation to restructure their tenets, taking the new information into account. That's how science works. You have a hypothesis, you do an experiment, and you adjust your description of reality based on the results of the experiment. But astrology didn't do this. There was no adjustment. Gauquelin had proven a certain kind of astrology, but the vast majority of astrologers continued to practice the old, discredited kind. And it wasn't just old-school apologists like Rudhyar. It was everyone, even the great scholar Robert Hand, the Francis Bacon of astrology, who had written that Gauquelin's findings are one of the strongest threats to mechanistic materialism in existence, continued to use interpretations that fly in the face of reality. Here is Hand's descriptions of the 12th house, which according to Gauquelin, along with the 9th, is the strongest house in the chart. Hand has written, and I quote, the 12th house signifies things like self-undoing, imprisonment, secrets in general, secret enemies, seclusion, and generally being withdrawn from the world, and it is usually regarded as being one of the worst houses in the chart, unquote. One of the worst houses in the chart. False! Totally untrue! And Robert Hand should know better. But he isn't alone. Here's what 4 other modern astrologers from 4 different websites have written about Mars in the 12th. Dana Gebhardt wrote, people with 12th house Mars often have difficulty going about what they want, unquote. Exactly the opposite of reality. Cafe Astrology writes, stifled energy, afraid to assert themselves, defeated from the start. No! The astrology place says those with Mars in the 12th house find asserting themselves very difficult. The desire to put themselves first is lacking. They hide from confrontation. They have no taste for conflict. Untrue. I could go on, but why bother? They all say pretty much the same thing. And they could not be more wrong. You know who has a Gauquelin Mars? Donald Trump. And you know who else has one? Hillary Clinton. Would you say that either Trump or Hillary hide from confrontations? Would you say they are defeated before they start? Would you say that either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton has difficulty going after what they want? All right, these are just 2 examples, and anecdotal evidence can be used to prove anything. But I am not using Trump and Hillary to prove a point. I am using them to illustrate one. Big difference. Are there counterexamples? Of course there are. There are millions of counterexamples. But make no mistake, the trend is undeniable. A person with Gauquelin Mars, whether it's in the 9th or 12th, is a warrior. That's what it's all about. Mars people are warriors. Jupiter people are networkers. Saturn people are workers. And Moon people are storytellers. The question is, why do astrologers make such egregious errors? Part of it rests with whom astrologers see. Astrologers are counselors. And the vast majority of their clients need help. They're lost, confused. They need guidance. And one reason they need guidance, one very big reason, is that they are failing to live up to their potential. Of course, a wimpy-seeing Mars person feels bad. But it's not because he is a wimp. It's because he knows that deep down he's a warrior and he wants to access that warrior energy. Mars people are born to do battle, and when they act like cowards, it bothers them. Of course it bothers them. They are living someone else's life. Another reason why astrologers mess up is their respect for tradition. This is how it's been since the time of Pythagoras. And there's something deeply comforting in that. And part of it, the largest part, I think, is because the setup is so damn seductive. And it's that seductiveness that causes the biggest problems. In traditional astrology, the planets all have meaning. Mars is the planet of aggression, Jupiter expansion, Saturn contraction. And as I said earlier, Gauquelin's filings largely verified these interpretations. It's one of the reasons the doubters were so desperate to discredit him. It wasn't just his results being good, it was that those results rang so many bells. But in traditional astrology, the houses also have a meaning. And this is where everything goes haywire. The first house is the house of personality, the second of possessions, the third of communication, and so forth. And if a planet falls into a house, it places its mark on the corresponding sphere of life. Aggressive Mars in the first gives you an aggressive personality. Mars in the second, you're aggressive about accumulating possessions. Mars in the third, you're aggressive about communicating. That's how traditional astrology works, and it's enormously seductive because it provides so many answers. Want to know what's going on in your family? Look to the 4th house. What do you do for fun? Look to the 5th house. And when you first start studying, you go, wow, because it explains so much. By which I mean, it appears to explain so much. The problem is, it's wrong. Why? Point 1, this is a picture of the traditional houses. The ascendant is on the left, the starting point. And the houses are numbered 1, 2, 3, etc., in a counterclockwise direction. And this numbering system makes sense if what you are looking at is transits and progressions, which move through the zodiac in a counterclockwise direction. But look here. This is a picture of the Gauquelin sectors. Once again, we look at the ascendant on the far left, but now the houses are numbered in a clockwise direction, because that is how the natal chart is generated. Both systems start at the ascendant, but the traditional house system, the one at the bottom, is numbered to reflect the orbit of the planets around the sun. The Gauquelin system, the one at the top, is numbered to reflect the path of the planets as they go through the sky during the day. So we have two distinct planetary phenomena: revolution and rotation, which cry out for two distinct symbol systems. But traditional astrology uses the same symbol system for both transits and natal charts. And that, my friends, is the core of the problem. When traditional astrologers talk about the 12th house, they talk about dark and dreary things, hidden things, secret things. But it's a terrible symbol, because the 12th house is not hidden. It's visible. Indeed, it represents the very first moment of a planet's visibility. And because it's the first, it has great power. A natal chart is quite literally a picture of the sky. The sky part at the top contains the planetary objects that can be seen. The Earth part at the bottom contains the planetary objects that cannot be seen, because the Earth is blocking them. And this position, the position of the so-called 12th house, is not hidden. It is not secret. It is visible. And if you take something that is visible and use it as a symbol of something hidden, you are never, ever going to understand how the universe works. Never. Ever. Ever. As above, so below, my friends. As above, so below. It's not just a cliche, it's a profound truth. But to represent that truth accurately, your symbols must be aligned with reality. Okay, that's point 1. Now point 2. The houses do not represent spheres of influence. You got to get that concept out of your brain. They represent points on a wave of intensity. If we take the straight line to represent the average, it's clear that some points are above average and some are below. And this is a graph based on math, but for those of you who have math anxiety, don't worry. Don't look at it in terms of math, look at it in terms of human urges. Mars is the urge to win. When Mars is in traditional houses 1 and 4, Gauquelin sectors 1 and 4, traditional houses 12 and 9, the urge to win is overwhelming. And when it dips down to its lowest point, which is houses 4 and 5 traditionally, the urge to win is still there because it's a human urge, but it's weaker. It's much, much weaker. With Jupiter, the urge is for recognition. See me, acknowledge me, like me, befriend me, pay attention to me, include me in your world. Include me in the larger world. And when it's in those peak sections in houses 12 and 9, the urge is overwhelming. But when you get down to the lower houses, the 4 and 5, the urge doesn't disappear because it's a human trait, but it's weaker. With Saturn, the urge is to be useful. And with that urge comes all sorts of sub-urges. The urges for order, for organization, for perfection. The list goes on and on, not just for Saturn, but for all the planets. And when Saturn is in the power zones, going up, 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 the urge is overwhelming. And when it's in the relaxed zones, the urge is still there because it's a human trait, which everyone has to a greater or lesser degree, but it's weaker, and other urges take over, such as the urge to relax, the urge to have fun, and yes, the urge to goof off, which are also human urges, which everyone has to a lesser or greater degree. With the moon, the urge is to express feelings. Everyone has that urge, but here it's very intense. Down there, it's not so intense. And other urges gain prominence, such as the urge to be practical and logical. Here's the same graph in a more familiar form, and anybody familiar with Gauquelin's work will recognize it. Here, the circle represents the average, and the points above the circle represent traits that are more intense, and the traits below the circle are ones that are less intense. But it's the same graph. Anyway, that's how house placements work. Peaks, troughs, and neutral territory. It's not that complicated, really. A small child can learn it. And in the weeks to come, I'll be teaching how to use this information to read charts. And I'll be teaching a data-driven brand of astrology called skyTotems. I won't be treating astrology as something ancient. I will be treating it as a social science. It can be studied in the same way sociology and psychology are studied. But although the same tools can be used, it's really not the same because the implications are so much greater. Sociology and psychology involve the study of groups within the world. But if astrology is true, it means that human life is not limited to the physical world. We are not just products of our environments or a conglomeration of genes. We are spiritual beings influenced by the stars, and looking at charts, if we look correctly, is like looking at God's plan for us. but we must look correctly. When tradition is wrong, we must discard tradition without regret. And when we get a glimpse of the truth as Gauquelin did, we must dig like badgers to get to the bottom of it. The Gauquelin data is not the final answer. It is step one on a path to knowledge, and hopefully in this class, I'll be leading you to step two, which is how to apply that data. And it'll be up to one of you out there to take us to step three. That's it for now. This is Patrick Jerome saying, see you next time.